Okay, picture this. What's being seized at the U.S. border? Like, surprisingly often these days.
Okay, I'm listening.
More often, believe it or not, than fentanyl.
Wait, really? What is it?
It's something, most of us have in the kitchen. Definitely a breakfast staple. Eggs.
You're kidding me. Eggs more than fentanyl. That sounds completely backwards.
I know, right? But it's not a joke. We've got news reports, analyses here, all pointing to this really unexpected surge in egg smuggling. It's become a real thing at the borders.
The eggs taking priority over, well, a major drug like fentanyl at border checkpoints. Okay,
Well,
we definitely need to unpack this. My first thought is just, wow, things must be seriously out of whack.
mine too. So that's what this deep dive is about. Crack this story open. The goal is to figure out why egg smuggling suddenly took off like this, and maybe what it tells us about economics and trade right now.
Right. A deep dive into egg contraband. I'm intrigued, gotta say.
So let's start with that statistic, because it really is pretty unbelievable. Since October, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, they've reported, get this, 3,768 seizures of bird and poultry products.
Okay.
And the vast majority of that, eggs. Now compare that to fentanyl seizures in the same time frame, just 352.
So more than 10 times as many egg seizures as fentanyl seizures.
Exactly, 10 times.
That's staggering. I mean, sure, you hear that less than 1% of fentanyl seizures are actually at the northern border, but this egg thing, you're saying it's happening everywhere. All borders.
Yeah, the reports suggest it's widespread. It's not just one border, like maybe you'd expect with some smuggling trends. This seems to be happening, well, pretty much everywhere.
Which leads to the obvious question.
What has made eggs suddenly so valuable? Why are people risking fines, maybe worse, to smuggle them? What's the deal?
Well, the main culprit, based on everything we're seeing here, it's the price, the dramatic jump in egg prices inside the U.S. We've seen this 36% surge in attempts to illegally bring eggs in compared to last year. And that figure, it pretty much mirrors the price increase. CBP in Detroit saw a similar 36% jump. But listen to this. San Diego.
Yeah.
Attempts are up 158%.
158%. Wow. That really points to the southern border, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe a bigger price gap there.
Seems likely. Reports are saying, in some spots in the U.S., eggs sit like $10 a dozen.
$10?
Yeah. Meanwhile, you hop over the border into Mexico and you can find them for under $2.
Okay, so that's potentially an $8 difference per dozen.
Exactly. And when the difference is that big, well, that $300 fine for a first offense, maybe it starts to look like a risk worth taking for some people, especially if they're buying in bulk.
And this wasn't just like a flash in the pan, was it? The prices stayed high for a while.
Oh, yeah. The average U.S. price peaked, I think it was early March 2025, at $8.64, which is, well, it's more than 4 times the long-term average. Usually it's around $2.
4 times the price for eggs. That's huge for a basic food item.
It really is. And there seem to be a few things feeding into this. One angle mention is this sort of ongoing trade situation, with the U.S., Canada, Mexico.
Right, the trade tensions.
Yeah. Now, the articles kind of question if there's a direct line to the specific egg smuggling boom, but, broader trade stuff can definitely ripple through supply chains and affect prices.
Sure, it's all connected. What else?
Well, there's the investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice. They're looking into whether some big egg producers might have been involved in price fixing, deliberately limiting supply.
Okay. So maybe not just market forces.
Possibly. But probably the biggest, most direct factor has been the avian flu outbreak. That started back in 2022.
Right. I remember hearing a lot about that.
Yeah. And to stop it spreading, millions and millions of egg-laying hens had to be culled. The number here is almost 170 million birds lost since early 2022.
170 million. That's just devastating for production capacity.
Absolutely. So less supply, prices go up. It's pretty direct. We saw egg prices jump over 50% just in February 2025 alone. They cooled off a tiny bit in March, but that kind of volatility really shows the impact.
It's still kind of hard to wrap your head around eggs.
Yeah.
Becoming like hot contraband.
Yep.
But thinking about it, this probably isn't the first time food itself became a smuggled good, is it?
Oh, definitely not. This whole extraordinary situation, as one writer put it, It actually has historical parallels.
Like what?
Well, think about the War of 1812. There were trade embargoes, right? That led to smuggling, all sorts of things. Or go back further, like pre-revolutionary France. They had these high internal taxes on basic stuff. Salt was a big one.
Salt tax.
Yeah, and things like calico cloth. It created this huge black market between different regions of France just to avoid the taxes.
So whenever you have restrictions or big price differences,
Yep.
smuggling follows.
Pretty much. And, on a much darker note, think about food smuggling into the Warsaw Ghetto during the Holocaust. Driven by sheer survival, obviously, but it shows how utterly essential food is and how it becomes contraband under extreme scarcity.
That's a very stark example.
It is. Even something more recent, like alcohol during U.S. Prohibition. Banned, but highly desired, so smuggling exploded. The core idea is the same. Scarcity, high demand, price gaps, or legal bans. They create the conditions for a black market.
So eggs are just the latest commodity to fall into that pattern, thanks to our current mix of economic and biological issues.
Exactly. It's fascinating, but also a bit unsettling when it happens to something so everyday.
It really makes you think about basic economics, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm reminded of that Thomas Sowell quote, something like, the first lesson of economics is scarcity.
There is never enough of anything to fully satisfy all those who want it. The first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics.
Yeah, that fits perfectly here, doesn't it? It really does. We have clear scarcity driving up egg prices. And then you see the political side grappling with it. Investigations, maybe changing import rules.
Trying to manage that scarcity, or its effects anyway. And what about Adam Smith? His ideas seem relevant too.
How so?
Well, that famous line, it is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest.
Right, self-interest driving the market.
Exactly. That huge price gap for eggs. That's a powerful self-interest motivator for smugglers. And it also makes you wonder about the producers. That DOJ investigation hints at the possibility that self-interest might be playing a role in keeping prices high beyond just the supply issue.
It all seems to connect. Scarcity, price hikes, self-interest, market responses, legal and illegal. Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Our research also dug up some interesting facts about the egg industry itself. Did you know the U.S. produces about 100 billion eggs a year?
100 billion?
Yeah. Apparently, enough to circle the Earth 5 times if you lay them end to end.
Wow, that number. It really puts the scale into perspective, doesn't it? And it shows how even with that much production, something like avian flu can still have a massive impact.
It really does. And the number of hens involved, over 300 million every year in the U.S. alone. Now, thinking about the expert takes on this whole price spike, there seem to be kind of conflicting views, or at least different angles.
Right.
Like one interesting thing was that the U.S. government, even with other trade stuff going on, apparently increased egg imports from Turkey specifically to try and bring prices down here.
Yeah, that's a fascinating move. It shows that, when a staple food price gets painful enough, pragmatic trade adjustments can happen, even if they seem a bit counter to broader policy trends. It's about managing that domestic supply pinch.
But then you have CBP pushing back, right? They're emphasizing the risks.
Exactly. They're focused on biosecurity. The danger of bringing in agricultural products isn't trivial. They mention things like harmful plant pests, but also specific animal diseases. For eggs from Mexico, the big concern is virulent Newcastle disease.
And that could be devastating for U.S. poultry farms.
Absolutely devastating. So there's this real tension. Do you ease imports to lower prices now? Or do you maintain strict controls to prevent a potentially catastrophic disease outbreak later? It's a tough balancing act.
Yeah, risk versus reward with potentially huge stakes. And then the cause of the high prices. You have the clear supply and demand story with the avian flu decimating flocks.
That's the most obvious factor, yeah.
But then there's that lingering suspicion, the one the DOJ is looking into, about market manipulation. Could major producers be, taking advantage of the situation to keep prices higher than they need to be?
That's the question. And you mentioned something important earlier. Demand for eggs is pretty inelastic.
Meaning people buy them anyway, even when prices go up.
Pretty much. They're a staple, right?
Yeah.
People need eggs. So unlike maybe a luxury item, you don't see demand drop off quite as sharply when the price jumps. And that inelasticity, it gives producers more power to raise prices when supply is tight. Okay. That makes sense. So the flu creates the shortage. And inelastic demand means prices can shoot up significantly, and maybe there's some manipulation layered on top.
That seems to be the complex picture. The ongoing investigation highlights that concern. that it might not just be the flu.
Okay, let's dive a little deeper into egg production itself. Some cool details came up, like hens need a good amount of daylight to lay consistently.
Yeah, at least 14 hours. That's why commercial farms use artificial lighting, especially in winter, to keep production steady all year round. It's about managing their natural cycles.
Makes sense. And what about washing eggs? I gather that's different in the U.S. compared to other places.
It is. In the U.S., regulations require eggs to be washed before sale, but washing removes this natural protective coating, the cuticle, from the shell.
Okay.
So because that protection is gone, U.S. eggs have to be refrigerated to prevent bacteria getting in. But in the U.K. and much of Europe, they typically don't wash the eggs. The cuticle stays intact, offering natural protection, so they can often be stored safely at room temperature. Huh. I had no idea. It's a pretty big difference in handling. And yolk color. Is that purely about diet?
Mostly, yeah. The color comes from pigments called carotenoids in the hen's feed. Some producers actually add things like marigold petals to the feed.
Marigolds, why?
To get that richer, deeper orange yolk color that many consumers prefer. It doesn't really change the nutritional value much. It's more about visual appeal. Marketing, really.
Interesting. Consumer perception driving feed ingredients.
Exactly. It's a common practice.
All these little details.
Yeah.
They really paint a picture of the industry behind the simple food.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so bring it back to the border. We have the CBP officers on the front lines of this, dealing with, well, egg smugglers. Must be a strange shift for them.
I imagine it is. And like we said, the reason for banning fresh egg imports is serious preventing diseases like virulent Newcastle disease. That could cripple the U.S. poultry industry. And think about the challenge. The U.S.-Canada border alone is, nearly 9,000 kilometers long?
Yeah.
And the amount of legal trade crossing is immense. Hundreds of billions of dollars. Trying to spot someone tucking away a few dozen or even cases of eggs in the midst of all that traffic, it's incredibly difficult.
Finding a needle in a haystack, basically. But still, this whole egg smuggling story, it's genuinely fascinating, isn't it? From just the shock of that initial statistic comparing it to fentanyl, to digging to the economics and the biology. It's been quite the journey.
It really has. And if you, listening, want to dig even deeper, there are some good resources. Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma gives that broad look at food systems.
Right.
For the border side, Gabriela Sanchez's Human Smuggling and Border Crossings explores those dynamics. And for a more academic take, there's Economics of the Food System. Lots to explore there.
Good recommendations.
Yeah.
So wrapping this up, this whole deep dive into egg smuggling, it really shows this unexpected collision of factors, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Economic pressures, mainly those sky-high prices driven by supply chain chaos and maybe market issues, combined with a major biological event, the avian flu. And the fact that eggs, simple eggs, ended up being seized more often than fentanyl at U.S. borders for a time. It's more than just a weird headline. It's a really stark reminder of how vulnerable our supply chains can be and how quickly things can get strange when the price of everyday basics goes through the roof.
It truly underscores that complex web connecting global trade, biosecurity, supply, demand, all playing out in something as basic as a carton of eggs you pick up at the store. It really makes you think, doesn't it? Consider just how many complex systems have to align perfectly for that simple egg to reliably and affordably get to your breakfast table.